All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to look at how a single, highly classified speech back in 1956 accidentally ignited a geopolitical firestorm, one that honestly nearly tore the entire communist bloc apart. We're looking at an absolute hinge point in the Cold War, a moment where simply trying to heal the wounds of a brutal dictatorship ended up sending massive shockwaves across the globe.
Okay, picture this. You're standing in the Great Kremlin Palace on the morning of February 25, 1956. You're a delegate, you've got your bags packed, and you're expecting to head home. But instead, you're called into this unscheduled, closed-door session. Nikita Khrushchev steps up to the podium and delivers something completely, utterly unimaginable for the time. A brutal, devastating takedown of Joseph Stalin. As the future KGB chief Vladimir Semachastny remembered it, the shock in that room was so absolute it produced a deathly silence. He literally said you could hear a bug fly by.
So, let's move into Section 1, the ghost of Stalin, which really sets up the terrifying baseline of Soviet rule of the time.
To really wrap our heads around why that exact moment in the Kremlin was so incredibly explosive, we have to look at the massive tightrope Stalin's successors were walking. The crucial point here is the stark, undeniable contrast between public myth and grim reality. State propaganda had spent decades building up this immense cult of personality, right? Painting Stalin as a benevolent, literally godlike father figure, the savior of the USSR. But if you pull back the curtain, the reality was mass arrests, vast gulag labor camps, and just this unchecked paranoia that targeted absolutely everyone.
And the sheer scale of that reality is almost difficult to process. Just before delivering his speech, a special commission revealed to Khrushchev a number: 688,503. Over 688,000 people were shot between 1935 and 1940 alone. These were executions based on completely fabricated anti-Soviet charges, with forced confessions extracted through brutal torture. That was the horrific, bloody legacy the new leadership was inheriting.
Which brings us to Section 2, the secret speech. This is where Khrushchev drops the bombshell.
Fast forward back to that room in 1956. Khrushchev decides to take a massive, honestly unprecedented political gamble to distance the new regime from all those crimes. For nearly 4 hours, speaking with visible agitation, he aggressively blamed Stalin personally. He was literally reading from actual interrogation protocols to the delegates, stating that Stalin himself gave the simple instructions on how to extract confessions: to beat, beat, and once again, beat. Piece by piece, over 4 hours, he just stripped away the myth of the infallible leader.
And this kicks off what we now call de-Stalinization. But you might be wondering, why on earth did Khrushchev do it? Well, years later, while waving a brandy glass around at a dinner, he explained his motives by comparing himself to Pinya the shoemaker, a storybook character forced by duty to bravely take the lead, completely regardless of the personal risk. It really highlights why this matters. Sometimes historical pivots don't happen out of some grand, calculating strategy. Sometimes they happen because someone simply feels obliged to tell the truth, even if it risks their own survival.
All right, moving to Section 3, a secret spreads, the domestic shockwaves.
The ultimate irony of this so-called secret speech is that, well, it didn't stay secret for long. In fact, Khrushchev didn't really want it to. It was soon read aloud to millions of party members and the Communist Youth League. And as you can imagine, it completely shattered the state's foundational myth. The narrative rapidly spiraled right out of his control. By March, pro-Stalin riots erupted in Tbilisi, Georgia, which was actually Stalin's birthplace, and that led to a violent clash with Soviet troops. Then, by June, the CIA had managed to get a copy, and they leaked it to the New York Times, broadcasting Soviet vulnerability to the entire world.
Now let's look at Section 4, the Polish crisis and the cracks in the bloc.
You know, shockwaves like that simply couldn't be contained within Soviet borders. They breached right into Eastern Europe, sparking immense political unrest in Poland as everyday citizens started demanding autonomy. Tensions fully boiled over in October 1956. A totally panicked Khrushchev, flanked by hardliners and Soviet generals, flew uninvited to Warsaw. The moment he stepped off the plane, he just erupted. He angrily brandished his fist under the nose of Polish leaders, shouting, "This number won't pass." It was a high-stakes tarmac standoff that came terrifyingly close to triggering a full-scale military clash.
The whole crisis was just incredibly tense. You had Soviet troops actively moving toward Warsaw, and it was only narrowly diffused because the newly ascendant Polish leader, Władysław Gomułka, basically expertly managed Khrushchev. Gomułka begged him to halt the tanks, swearing up and down that Poland would remain a loyal Warsaw Pact ally just as long as the Soviets didn't enter the capital.
Khrushchev vacillated. He went back and forth, but ultimately he backed down and agreed to show restraint.
Which leads us directly into Section 5, the Hungarian Revolution, the explosion, and the Iron Fist.
Because while Poland bent and managed to compromise, Hungary exploded. The reformist energy ignited a full-blown, undeniable revolution. Just look at how fast this escalated. On October 23rd, peaceful student protests demanded Polish-style reforms. The crowd swells, and they physically tear down a massive statue of Stalin. That very evening, Hungarian secret police fired on those unarmed demonstrators, and it rapidly turned into an armed citizen uprising. By October 24th, Soviet tanks were literally rolling into Budapest. But that intervention completely backfired. It caused Hungarian security forces to collapse, with some of them actually joining the rebels.
The geopolitical panic back in Moscow was so profound it was taking a literal physical toll on the leadership. Trying frantically to secure backing from other communist nations, Khrushchev and his colleague Georgy Malenkov flew through a fierce thunderstorm and then had to endure this harrowing midnight boat ride just to beg Yugoslav leader Tito for support. Malenkov was so violently seasick he lay down in the small boat with his eyes shut tight, pale as a corpse. Honestly, it's a perfectly grim metaphor for the dizzying instability that was facing the entire Soviet Empire right then.
So, back in the Kremlin, Khrushchev is basically paralyzed with indecision. In late October, the leadership actually agreed on what they called the peaceful path. They declared they would pull troops out entirely, even as the new Hungarian leader announced plans to leave the Warsaw Pact. But then, almost overnight, everything flipped. Terrified by heavy pressure from China's Mao Zedong and the horrifying thought that the West would view them as weak and capitalize on it, Khrushchev completely reversed course. He abandoned the peace option and chose the military path.
And that brings us to Section 6, the cost of reform, and its bloody consequences. Despite desperate pleas from allies who warned it would absolutely ruin the party's global reputation, Khrushchev felt his hands were tied. He felt he had no other choice. He ordered the tanks back into Budapest. On November 4th, Soviet intervention decisively crushed the revolution. Yes, it ensured the survival of the empire, but at a truly horrific human cost: 20,000 Hungarian casualties and 1,500 Soviet casualties. It proved a very dark reality. Keeping the Soviet bloc intact ultimately required the exact same brute force and terror that Khrushchev had literally just denounced in his secret speech. So as you reflect on the incredible fallout of these events, from the hushed, stunned shock in the Kremlin to the blood on the streets of Budapest, we want to leave you with the ultimate paradox of Khrushchev's gamble. Can a totalitarian system ever truly be partially reformed? Or does removing the terror inherently guarantee its total collapse? It's a massive question that defined the Cold War, and honestly, one that still haunts authoritarian regimes today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.